actors have.
In Dynamics of Contention, you and Tilly and Tarot make an argument against the macro that I think is completely compelling, but it's the idea there are no laws of civil wars, there are no causal regularities about revolutions.
Right.
The regularities in the laws and the law governance doesn't appear at that level.
No.
If it's there at all, it's at the level of mechanisms and processes.
If it's there. And I still think that to me is a big question. But you're absolutely right. Our bet was that if you were going to find any kind of regular processes, any kind of pattern regularity to the unfolding of episodes of contention, it's going to be at that level, and none of these other levels we tend to privilege.
Cool. This segues to another topic that was on my mind, and it has to do with I guess what we call comparative historical sociology, which is, in a way, in my opinion, one of the strongest pieces of research going on in the social sciences today. It is mezzo, it is attentive to context, and it's comparative. It looks at similar instances and tries to determine, here are some similar processes, here are some different processes, right. Here are some outcomes. Among your colleagues, Tilly, for sure, was deeply comparativist. I think Sid Tarot is also pretty much inclined towards comparison, but I'm not sure that Doug McAdam is equally inclined towards comparison. So I wonder what you'd say about the value of comparison.
I think I always look for comparative leverage. Chuck's version of comparison, he was way smarter than me, so maybe he could roam across the landscape in 1,000 years at a crack. I'm not that smart, but I've talked about this study of 20 communities who are confronting these citing decisions. I wanted comparison. I wanted to be able to compare 20 cases, right. But these seem to me to be cases that are broadly comparable. I get a little more nervous when the cases being compared vary on so many different dimensions in the way they often did in Chuck's work. So there was, I think, tension between the three of us over what kinds of comparisons are most are viable, are really reasonable to engage in. So a lot of my work is comparative, but nowhere near as much as either Chuck's or Sid. But I'm more comfortable when the basis of comparison holds a whole bunch of things constant, and where I'm really convinced that the units being compared, or the cases being compared, are broadly comparable.
So the contrast, I guess, I was drawing was your work on the black insurgency of the civil rights movement and the success of the civil rights movement in the South, and really you're even limiting that further to the origins, not to the total. I guess you could think of that as having a comparative element, because different parts of the South kind of work differently. But you could also think of it as being a single case.
It is.
And I think there's a huge amount of power in looking at a single case in a great deal of detail. But I guess I wonder, just kind of counterfactually, how you would have felt about framing that study as a comparative study with the Solidarity movement in Poland, say. Would there be value in that comparison, or are the cases too dissimilar?
No, I think that I would, there's a huge N of 1 problem, obviously, with any case study. I will be perfectly honest, there were two reasons I narrowed my focus there. One is very practical, and that was I was writing my dissertation, and it was going to be a 5 or 6 year struggle to begin with. I wanted to keep it manageable so I could hopefully get out of grad school. But beyond that, I'm very conscious of this early on as I tried to think about what I wanted to do for my dissertation on, and then how to structure it. There was to my mind, there was no viable theory of social movements in the social sciences at that time, at all. I had gone off as an undergraduate, and I mentioned this earlier, but I think off camera, I was very involved in the anti-war movement in a very moderate way, I'd like to add. But in any case, I was working in Washington off and on for 3 years, lobbying for an end to the draft on behalf of a coalition of peace churches from California. And so when I went to in college, I was sort of keen to see if there were courses being offered on social movements. And of course I turned to the political science department, assuming, well, I think of this as a political phenomenon, surely there'll be courses on this. Not a course to be had, of course, in political science at that point. I didn't know what sociology was, so I'm sure I wasn't looking in the right place in the catalog for that, but it wouldn't have been there anyway. I sort of gave up looking for those kind of courses, and then I was taking a course in abnormal psychology, I think, to fulfill some social science requirement, and lo and behold, there was a quarter of the course on social movements, because it was a subfield within abnormal psychology, because the conventional understanding at the time was that movements weren't a form of politics. It was a very aberrant, strange, irrational sort of social phenomena that told us much more about the exotic, the irrational, the dysfunctional in social life. I recoiled in horror, I remember, at the time, and it didn't connect to my experience at all. And when I went to grad school, there were opportunities to begin to work on, in a serious way, on social movements. And so I said, you know what, there isn't a viable theory. A single case, could be the vehicle for thinking more generally about social movements. I could be dead wrong. This could be a wildly atypical case. But I wanted to understand as much empirically about the civil rights movement as I could, with a single theoretical goal. Use it to abstract a more general theory of social movements. Put it out there, and in the ways of the academy, if I'm wrong, people will quickly determine that this theory doesn't hold beyond the civil rights movement, or maybe it will have legs. So at that point in the development of that fledgling field, this felt like the right way to proceed. A single case rendered well could be useful. At this point, I think I would struggle to do a single case study of a social movement, because there's now a couple of theories, or 2 or 3 theories out there. And now I would want to say, okay, let's broaden the number of cases and sort of ask across these N cases, how well does this or that theory hold up? But that reflects a very different place in the development of this field than where I was in the 1970s.
Now, this actually pertains to another question that I have kind of thought about with respect to your work, and that is, what's the relationship between research and inquiry and sociological theory? You've just described one route from detailed study, inquiry, theoretically sensitive, I presume. You're kind of paying attention to what seems important here, leading eventually to your goal was formulation of a theory of social movements. A different perspective that people have sometimes taken is, I've got the theory, now let me comprehend the instance according to the theory, which just kind of inherently seems like a bad idea to me. But I wonder...
Oh, I think it's a bad idea. I think that there's, I'm always wary of somebody whose commitment to a theoretical perspective is so intense that they're virtually guaranteed to wrestle complex history into shape, right? I'll make it fit,